how your net worth explodes after the first $100,000. You know that feeling when you check your savings account and see maybe, I don't know, $12,000 sitting there, and part of you feels proud because, hey, that's real money. You worked hard for that. But another part of you, the quieter, more anxious part, does the mental math and realizes that at this rate, at this pace of saving a few $100 a month after rent and groceries and student loans and everything else, you're looking at literal decades before you hit anything that feels like actual wealth. And it's not even about wanting to be rich necessarily. It's just you want to breathe. You want to feel like you're making progress, like the game isn't rigged, like all those articles about compound interest and investing early actually apply to your life, and not just to people who started with family money or got lucky with some tech job in their 20s. My name is Adam, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, wealth psychology, and specifically why the journey from zero to $100,000 feels so impossibly different from what happens after. Because here's the thing nobody really tells you when you're just starting out, scraping together your first few $1,000s in savings. The first 100,000 is brutal. It's slow, it's discouraging. It feels like you're pushing a boulder up a mountain while everyone around you seems to be coasting downhill. But something genuinely strange and almost magical happens after you cross that threshold. And I don't mean magical in some woo-woo manifestation sense. I mean mathematically magical, psychologically transformative, the kind of shift that makes you look back and think, oh, that's why wealthy people keep getting wealthier. And if you're sitting there thinking, cool story, but I'm nowhere near $100,000 and this probably doesn't apply to me, I get it, I really do. But stick with me here, because understanding why your net worth accelerates after that point isn't just useful for when you get there, it completely changes how you think about money right now, how you prioritize, what you focus on. And honestly, it might be the perspective shift that keeps you from giving up when the progress feels painfully slow. So let's start with the obvious question. Why 100,000? Why not 50,000 or 200,000? What's so special about that particular number? And honestly, the number itself isn't magic. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime business partner who passed away recently, he's the one who famously said that the first 100,000 is a bit, but you gotta do it. His exact words. And he wasn't just being dramatic, he was pointing to something mathematically real that happens when you accumulate a certain critical mass of capital. Think about it like this. Let's say you're managing to save $5,000 a year. That's roughly $400 a month, which for a lot of people is actually pretty ambitious after all their expenses. At that rate, getting to 100,000 takes you 20 years. 20 years just from savings alone, assuming you're stuffing it under your mattress or in some zero-interest checking account. But now let's say you're investing that money in something relatively safe, like a broad stock market index fund that historically returns about 10% annually. In your early years, when you've got maybe $10,000 or $20,000 invested, that 10% annual return gives you an extra $1,000 or $2,000 a year. That's nice, it helps, but it's not life-changing. It's basically like getting a tiny bonus that almost feels negligible compared to the effort you're putting into saving your own money. But here's where it gets interesting. Once you hit $100,000 invested, that same 10% annual return gives you $10,000 in a single year. $10,000 that you didn't have to work for, didn't have to sacrifice anything to get. It just appeared because your money was working for you. And suddenly, your net worth isn't just growing from what you're adding to it anymore, it's growing almost as much from its own internal momentum. The investment returns start to equal or exceed your annual contributions. Your money has reached a size where it can start pulling its own weight in the relationship. My friend Lewis hit this point a couple years ago, and I remember him texting me genuinely confused because he checked his investment account and it had grown by $8,000 in a single month. Not from his contributions, from market gains. He was like, "This feels weird. I didn't do anything." And that's exactly the point. He'd done the hardest part already by building that base. But let me back up, because I think we need to talk about why that first 100,000 is so uniquely brutal. Because if you're in the thick of it right now, you need to understand that what you're experiencing isn't a personal failure. It's just math being particularly cruel at small numbers. When you're starting from zero or close to it, every financial setback feels catastrophic. Your car needs a $1,500 repair? That might be 6 months of savings, gone. You get sick and have to cover a deductible? There goes another chunk. You want to take a vacation or attend a friend's wedding in another state? You're basically choosing between living your life and building wealth. And psychologically, this does something really insidious to your brain. Because humans aren't great at delayed gratification in the first place. But when the delay is measured in decades and the gratification is this abstract concept called compound interest that you can barely even see in your account statements, it's really, really hard to stay motivated. I remember when I had about 35,000 saved and invested, and I ran one of those compound interest calculators to see when I'd hit $1 million, and it said something like 33 years, and I just closed my laptop and stared at the wall for a while. 33 years. I'd be in my 60s. The math felt impossible, almost insulting. But here's what that calculator didn't show me, and what most people don't realize. The journey isn't linear. The first 100,000 might take you 15 or 20 years, but the second 100,000, it might take you 6, and the third 100,000 might take 3. And by the time you're working on your 8th or ninth or 10th 100,000, they're arriving faster than you can even track them. It's exponential growth, but our brains are wired for linear thinking. We assume that if it took us 5 years to save our first 25,000, it'll take us 20 years to save 100,000. We extrapolate in straight lines, but money doesn't grow in straight lines once it reaches a certain critical mass. It grows in curves that bend upward, steeper and steeper. Okay, so we've established that compound interest and investment returns do most of the heavy lifting after you hit that first 100,000. But there's actually something else happening here that's just as important and way less discussed. And it has to do with psychology and behavior and the weird ways that having some wealth changes how you make decisions. When you have no financial cushion, you're constantly in this defensive crouch. Every decision is about avoiding catastrophe. You take the stable job over the higher risk, higher reward opportunity because you can't afford to bet on yourself. You stay in the cheaper apartment even though a slightly nicer place closer to work would save you 2 hours of commuting daily because the rent difference feels scary. You don't negotiate as hard for raises because you're terrified of rocking the boat. Your entire financial life is about defense, about not losing ground. But something shifts when you have $100,000 in assets. It's still not rich, not by a long shot, but it's enough to change your relationship with risk. It's enough to create options. You can take a 3-month sabbatical to learn a new skill without facing homelessness. You can leave a toxic job before you have the next one lined up. You can invest in yourself. Take that course, start that side business, move to a city with more opportunities because you have a cushion that gives you permission to be strategic instead of just reactive. And this matters more than people think because wealth isn't just about accumulation, it's about leverage. It's about being able to make moves that poor or cash-strapped people simply cannot make, moves that have asymmetric returns. There's this whole category of investments and opportunities that are basically invisible until you have capital. Real estate, for instance. Everyone knows that owning property builds wealth, but what people forget is that you need a down payment first. If you're scraping by paycheck to paycheck, a 20% down payment on even a modest house might as well be $1 million. But if you've built up $100,000 in savings and investments, suddenly that down payment is doable. Scary, maybe, but doable. Or angel investing, or starting a business without having to go into soul-crushing debt, or even just smaller things, like being able to buy in bulk to save money over time, or affording quality items that last instead of cheap stuff you have to replace constantly. There's this concept called the Boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness. It comes from a Terry Pratchett novel, actually, where a wealthy person buys a $50 pair of boots that last 10 years, but a poor person can only afford $10 boots that wear out every year, so they end up spending $100 over that same decade. Being broke is expensive, and having some capital finally lets you escape that trap. Let me tell you about something that happened to Lewis because it illustrates this point perfectly. He'd been working in marketing for about 7 years. Decent job, decent salary, nothing spectacular. He'd managed to save up about $70,000 by living pretty frugally, investing consistently, just doing all the right things everyone tells you to do. And then his company started having financial troubles. Layoffs were coming, everyone could feel it. And Lewis had this opportunity to jump to a startup that was offering him equity and a slight pay cut, but way more upside potential. And he took it. He took it because he had $70,000 in the bank that gave him permission to take that risk. The startup didn't become a unicorn or anything, but it did well enough that when it got acquired 3 years later, his equity was worth about $140,000. Combined with what he'd already saved and the growth from his investments during that time, he suddenly had something like $250,000 in net worth. And here's the thing, would he have taken that job if he'd had $5,000 in savings? No way. He would have stayed in the safe, slowly dying company until they laid him off, then scrambled to find whatever job would take him. His financial cushion didn't just protect him, it enabled him to be opportunistic, to make a bet that paid off. This is what people mean when they talk about how wealth begets wealth. It's not just about returns on investment, it's about how having resources fundamentally changes your decision-making landscape, gives you access to opportunities that didn't exist before, lets you play a completely different game than the one you were playing when you were broke. Now, let's talk about the timescale issue, because I think this is where a lot of people get discouraged and give up. You're probably in your 20s or 30s, or maybe early 40s, and you're doing the math in your head, okay, if I can save $10,000 a year, that's 10 years to hit $100,000, which means I won't see this magical acceleration until I'm in my 40s, which feels like forever from now. And yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, it is a long time. The first 100,000 does take a decade or more for most people. But here's what you need to understand. You're either spending that decade building towards something or you're spending it treading water. The time is going to pass either way. I know that sounds like some motivational poster nonsense, but I mean it practically. Let's say you're 28 right now. In 10 years, you'll be 38. That's happening. That's not negotiable. The only question is whether 38-year-old you has $100,000 in assets and the net worth that's starting to snowball, or whether 38-year-old you is still living paycheck to paycheck, still starting from zero, still feeling like wealth is this impossible thing that happens to other people. And here's the beautiful, slightly unfair truth. If you start now, if you buckle down and build that first 100,000 by 38, you might hit $1 million by 50, because the second half of the journey is so much faster than the first half. The compound interest that felt invisible and pointless when you had $15,000 becomes this incredible, unstoppable force when you have $300,000. But if you wait until you're 38 to start, you're now building your first 100,000 in your 40s, and you might not hit that $1 million mark until your 60s or 70s, if at all. Time is the one thing you cannot get back, and compound interest rewards time more than it rewards almost anything else. Starting early matters way more than starting with a lot. Okay, so let's get practical. How do you actually build that first 100,000 when it feels so impossible? First, you need to internalize that this is a marathon, not a sprint. I know everyone says that, but what does it actually mean day to day? It means your goal isn't to save $100,000 as fast as humanly possible by living in a cardboard box and eating ramen for 5 years. That's not sustainable, and honestly, you'll probably burn out and give up. Your goal is to build systems and habits that let you save and invest consistently over time without making yourself miserable. For most people, that means aiming to save somewhere between 15 and 25% of your income. Maybe more if you're naturally frugal or have a high income, maybe less if you're just starting out or living in an expensive city. The actual percentage matters less than the consistency. Automating it helps enormously. Set up automatic transfers to your investment account right when your paycheck hits, so you never see that money sitting in your checking account tempting you. Second, you need to invest it, not just save it. I know investing feels scary, especially if you've never done it before, but keeping your money in a savings account earning 1% interest while inflation is eating away 3% of its value every year is basically a guaranteed way to stay poor. You're losing purchasing power just by playing it safe. You don't need to become a stock-picking genius. You don't need to time the market or trade crypto or do anything complicated. Boring index funds, something like a total stock market index fund or an S&P 500 index fund, have historically returned about 10% annually over long periods. There will be down years, there will be crashes, but over the decade or two it takes you to build that first 100,000, the market has almost always recovered and then some. Third, increase your income whenever possible. I know that's easier said than done, but here's the reality. There's a limit to how much you can cut expenses. You can't cut your way to wealth. At some point, you need to earn more. That might mean developing skills that are more valuable to employers, negotiating harder for raises, switching jobs strategically, starting a side hustle, whatever. But focusing some energy on the income side of the equation can accelerate your timeline dramatically. If you're saving 20% of a $50,000 income, that's $10,000 a year. If you can bump your income to $70,000 and maintain that same savings rate, you're suddenly saving $14,000 a year, and you've just shaved multiple years off your timeline to $100,000. Let me address something that might be nagging at the back of your mind. What if you're starting late? What if you're already in your 30s or 40s and you don't have much saved, and this whole conversation feels like salt in a wound? First off, I get it. The comparison game is brutal, and social media makes it worse because you're constantly seeing people who seem to have it all figured out at 25. But here's the thing. Most people don't have it figured out. Most people are in debt or barely scraping by or living on the financial edge, even if they look successful on Instagram. And starting late isn't ideal, but it's not a death sentence either. You've still got decades of earning and investing ahead of you, and the same principles apply. Compound interest, behavioral changes, leveraging opportunities. They just happen on a slightly compressed timeline. The key is to not let regret paralyze you. Yeah, it would have been better to start at 22, but you didn't, or you couldn't, or life got in the way, and that's okay. You can't change the past, but you can change the trajectory from here forward. I've seen people in their 50s build substantial wealth in a decade because they finally got serious about it, increased their income dramatically, invested aggressively, and let the late-stage acceleration of compound growth work its magic. It's harder, sure, you have to be more intentional, but it's absolutely possible. There's one more thing I want to talk about, and it's maybe the most important and the most uncomfortable. The psychological shift that needs to happen in your brain around money and worth and success. When you're broke or just starting out financially, there's this constant undercurrent of scarcity thinking. Every dollar feels precious. Every expense feels like a potential mistake. You're hyper-focused on not wasting money, which sounds responsible, but can actually become penalizing. I remember being so anxious about money in my mid-20s that I wouldn't go out with friends because I didn't want to spend $20 on drinks. I'd skip professional development opportunities because the couple $100 course fee felt irresponsible. I was so focused on defense, on preserving what little I had, that I couldn't think strategically about growth. And here's the paradox. Building wealth requires you to have some abundance mindset even when you don't feel abundant. It requires you to invest in yourself, to take calculated risks, to spend money on things that might have long-term returns, even when the short-term cost feels uncomfortable. This doesn't mean being reckless or buying stupid stuff you don't need. It means recognizing that sometimes spending money is an investment in your education, your health, your network, your skills, and that playing it too safe can actually keep you stuck. The truly wealthy people I know aren't the ones who are most frugal. They're the ones who learned how to deploy capital strategically, who understand the difference between an expense and an investment, who can tell when spending money will create leverage or opportunity versus when it's just consumption. Learning to think this way is hard, especially when you're still in the phase where every dollar really does matter. But it's a crucial mindset shift if you want to accelerate your journey. So let me bring this all together because we've covered a lot of ground and I don't want you to lose the thread. Your net worth explodes after the first 100,000 because of three main forces working together. The mathematical power of compound interest finally becoming meaningful at that scale, the psychological and behavioral shifts that come from having options and a cushion, and the access to opportunities and leverage that simply don't exist when you're starting from zero. But here's what I really want you to take away from this. The journey to that first 100,000 is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to feel slow and discouraging and unfair. That's not a bug in the system. It's the initiation. It's the price of admission to the part of the game where momentum starts working in your favor instead of against you. And I know it's tempting to look at that timeline, that decade or more of grinding and saving and investing, and feel defeated before you even start. But think about it this way. If you're in your 20s or 30s right now, you've got time. You've got the most valuable asset there is, which is years for that compound interest to work its magic. And even if you're older, even if you feel like you're starting late, remember that the second 100,000 comes faster than the first. The third comes faster than the second. The acceleration is real, and it's waiting for you on the other side of this initial push. So yeah, the first 100,000 is a bitch. Charlie Munger was right about that. But you gotta do it. You gotta put in the work, stay consistent, keep investing even when it feels pointless. Resist the temptation to give up when your progress feels slow. Because here's the truth that nobody tells you when you're just starting out. There's a version of your future self, maybe 10 or 15 years from now, who's going to look back at this moment, this decision point, where you either committed to the path or walked away, and they're going to be so grateful that you stayed the course. They're going to check their net worth and see it growing by tens of thousands of dollars in a single year from investment returns alone. And they're going to think, thank God I started when I did. Thank God I didn't give up when it felt impossible. Be that person. Build that foundation. Put in the work now so that future you can experience the acceleration, the momentum, the compound growth that makes everything you're doing today worthwhile. The first 100,000 is the hardest, but it's also the most important. It's the difference between staying stuck in the same financial patterns forever and finally breaking through to the other side where wealth starts building itself. And you can do it. It's not easy, but it's simple. Save consistently, invest intelligently, stay patient, increase your income when possible. Don't give up when progress feels slow. The time is going to pass anyway. Make sure you're building something during that time. Make sure that future version of yourself has something to be grateful for. Your net worth explodes after the first 100,000, but only if you do the hard work of getting there first.